Hello, everybody. My name is Maurice Button. I'm the CEO of City and Financial Global, and it's my great pleasure to be interviewing Robert Allen, who's a partner in the Disputes and Investigations team at Simmons & Simmons. And this interview is taking place in advance of the Climate Litigation and Activism 2022 Summit being held in central London on the 22nd of November. Welcome, Robert.
Hi there, and nice to meet you here.
Okay, well, let's dive into the questions with no further ado. So my first question is this: what do you see as the key drivers behind the rise in climate activism and litigation?
The first very obvious key driver is the climate crisis, the situation that is unfolding rapidly around us every day in the news and in our daily lives.
Mm,
However, I think possibly more nuanced answer to that is also the litigation always tends to come towards the end of any cycle of regulatory change, business change.
mm,
And what we have seen for a long time, of course, are a firming up and development of regulations, particularly in certain industries, in the financial institutions industry and other similar sectors. We've also seen some changes in the pressures being put on companies through shareholder resolutions, and we've started to see real effects on people, everyday people in their day-to-day life, and these all combine ultimately to create the perfect situation and environment for litigation. And
mm,
once the rules are in place, then they start to get broken. And once the rules are in place to be broken, those such as climate activists and NGOs have a really good position and platform on which to leverage their work.
mm. Yeah, no, I fully agree with that. I mean, do you think in particular the FCA's recent product labels, its transition plans, mandated transition plans that have to be published next year, the EU's work on disclosures, and the SEC's rules, do you think these will all combine together to provide a better platform for activists and, as you say, later on down the road, litigation?
And again, undoubtedly, I think you mentioned the FCA first. The FCA is, if I can be a little charitable and with no disrespect, I suppose gearing up with further
Mm,
and further guidance and rules and consultations. So that I think you mentioned sustainability disclosure requirements and investment labels, for example, and it is building ahead of steam. Then that is certainly starting to put pressure, even more pressure on UK regulated companies. The
mm,
SEC, on the other hand, is I'd say miles ahead, not only in terms of its rules, and the focus on greenwashing, but then
mm,
obviously its enforcement. So its investigations into DWS, obviously, and various banks, BNY Mellon, and those kind of regulatory enforcements, those kind of sanctions, inevitably again lead to follow-on and satellite litigation and other forms of contentious actions.
So, given this increasing risky situation, how should companies manage, well, companies and financial institutions, how should they manage the legal risk when it comes to climate change? And what sort of internal procedures should they put in place to protect themselves?
I think the key thing to do to manage the legal risk is primarily to be aware of what the legal risk is. And I think, as I've alluded to, a lot of regulations, rules, and guidance which are developing quite quickly. Have to keep up with that, but also know what they are. And in order to be aware of the legal risk and therefore comply with it, you need a team that's dedicated to it. So a climate change focused team, a ESG legal team, those things are becoming critical. I mean, this is a board level issue and it needs to be dealt with at that level, and the responsibility needs to be properly apportioned to a team that can dedicate itself to looking at that risk. I think also companies, particularly publicly listed companies, need to be very aware of what their shareholders are saying. We're seeing a lot in the sphere of well, when you come to AGMs and you start to look at shareholder resolutions, and there are a lot of ESG resolutions across the whole board, but primarily those have been focused, almost high profile of those have been focused on climate issues, and that is what companies need to and will sit up and look at and start dealing with.
Mm. So what sort of advice would you give your clients in relation to how they engage with activists and obviously potential litigants? Should they be maintaining an open dialogue with pressure groups who they know would be interested in what they're doing, or what would be your advice?
Well, the classic lawyer's answer again here is the right one, I think, which it entirely depends on the case that's being brought against them, the nature of the activists and litigants, what are the allegations that the clients are facing. Are they ones where the clients are currently, for example, working hard to put things in place? Would that type of litigation, in fact, ironically, derail those efforts?
Mm.
Otherwise, as well as dealing with the litigation on foot, what about the reputational issues that will arise inevitably arising out of any of these kind of processes? That this is all very high profile stuff in the UK. It is often the issuing of claims, quite apart from their conduct, quite apart from how defendants are responding. It's the issuing of claims that already attract publicity. And a great example, and an NGO that is brilliant at doing this is Client Earth. It lets everyone know, and not just its supporters, but the media know what it's doing, what action it's taking, and that it has submitted or served a claim form. And so I think the key advice is just be very alive to what's going on. This is litigation that will be conducted in a different type of a different with different parameters, let's say, to maybe what some clients have been used to.
Yeah, I suppose that one response might be this new phenomenon termed green hushing, which has been mentioned in the press a bit recently. Do you think by limiting their public statements, companies can protect themselves, or do you think ultimately it would act to their detriment to do so?
Again, I think this is a fine question of balance. I think a key part of litigation, particularly in the UK, but in many other, at least civil jurisdictions, civil law jurisdictions, and common law jurisdictions, is the disclosure of information um, uh, and efforts by one side to uncover what another side is doing. Now, if companies that are engaging in, let's say, very well determined and strong green hushing, are thinking that is going to just simply mean that things won't get seized upon, particularly as so much of this is in the public arena, I think that may backfire on those companies very much. On the other hand, when you're in any kind of dispute, it often isn't sensible to simply show your hand completely right at the beginning. So there are degrees of balance here, but the fact that the media now have a term for it, and the fact that it is gaining attention, means that you're almost certainly starting to lose the public relations battle, which is, as we know, just as important as sometimes as the actual litigation itself.
Yeah, yeah. I've noticed that these litigation funding firms seem to have set up their stands in this area with various sort of link ups with law firms, etc. Do you think this will catalyze further growth in the number of climate change cases?
I think so, yes. Broadly speaking, just because funders and similar have started looking into a sector and started investigating the potential for certain claims, that doesn't always mean that there'll be growth in that type of claim. But here we're talking
Yeah.
about climate change cases. There's
Yeah.
obviously considerable life in them, and there are claims to be made. There are claimant books to be built. And so I think it's inevitable that the funding litigation will assist with the growth in that area. To say it'll catalyze it, I think might suggest it is the only thing contributing to the growth, which I don't think it is, but I certainly think it'll help it. Yeah.
Fascinating. Well, Robert, very, very interesting conversation. Thank you so much for joining us today. And we look forward to continuing talking about these and related themes at the Climate Litigation and Activism 2022 Summit in Central London on the 22nd of November. So to all the people watching this, we very much hope that you can join us on the day. Robert, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.